Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Good Book Club. It is our June edition. It's June 9th, Sunday, and we are really excited about our book today. We have a couple slides to go through at the very beginning, just sort of some information. We're going to start with our mission statement, and we've asked Melissa to go ahead and read that.
The Good Book Club mission statement. The Good Book Club was created to bring together nuanced Mormons, post-Mormons, and others with a shared interest in Mormonism. We are introspective, critical thinkers seeking to learn, connect, and build relationships through the catalyst of literature. We welcome all who are searching for a safe space to share authentic thoughts, feelings, and ideas through open dialogue and shared experiences relative to Mormon culture. As we deconstruct previous beliefs, we encourage all to find happiness in the process of discovering new religious ideologies, spirituality, and life philosophies.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. That is our book club mission statement and kind of gives everybody an idea of what our goals are. I'm not sure if I am spotlighted, but as we go along, if that does work out, we can do that. We want to draw everybody's attention to a really fun time that we had. We had our book club co-founders, Bruce and Landon and myself. Bruce came to town. Landon and I live in Utah, and we had an amazing lunch that lasted probably like 4 hours. We sat there forever just talking at R&R Barbecue, and here's a shot. It kind of looks like a tapir now that I look at it, but no, it's a pig. So we had a great time. We always love it when Bruce comes to town. We also had a chance to attend Pride in Salt Lake City. It just gets bigger and bigger every year, the festivities and the parade. And lots of people stopped by. They said hi. We met some book club members. It was really fun, a really, really, really fun day. So thank you to everybody that said hi, or at least said awesome, weren't able to stop and see us. So let's talk about a few upcoming events before we get to our book today. Sunstone is coming up. This is August 1st through 3rd. It is going to be at the University of Utah. This is an amazing, amazing conference. I can't even stress how much information there is, amazing people, amazing presentations. If you are in the area, this would be an incredible opportunity. Oh, look, we already missed the early bird pricing. Dang it. Anyway, it's still worth it, whatever price it is. Just Google Sunstone, get a ticket, and we'll see y'all there. It'll be fun. Mormon Stories Book Club that I helped John DeLynn run. We're still trying to get Uncultured on the schedule, but keep reading this book. It's incredible, everybody, and we'll do this soon. If not, maybe we'll throw her over on Mormonish. Landon and I over on Mormonish Podcast just interviewed Alyssa Grenfall. You can find that on Mormonish Podcast on YouTube. This is an amazing book, kind of a field guide of how to leave the Mormon church. So everybody pick up a copy of that. She's wonderful. This book that's coming up, I'm going to hold it up. Landon and I both have copies before it's even out. It's pre-order to the point where John DeLynn and Matt Harris, who are doing a series together, they called us. They're like, do you guys have the book? We haven't even seen the book. Even Matt Harris, the author himself, had not seen the book yet. So Landon met John, I think, at a gas station somewhere and gave him a copy of the book to be able to hold up. This is incredible. This is the story of how the priesthood ban was lifted, the behind the scenes, the meeting minutes, the journal entries, the notes. This is firsthand sources. This will change your view on everything. And it's so important that John DeLynn and Matt Harris are doing, I think they said anywhere between a 20 to 30 part series on this. I know they've already taped 4 or 5. I think the first one is going to air tomorrow. This is incredible, the information in here. This is going to change everything as far as how people look at the Q15 and how they operate. It's very revealing, and I will say very damning. So anyway, pre-order your copy now and look for that series on Mormon Stories. We're also going to have them on Mormonish. Matt is one of our favorite guests. So awesome. All right. Nominations for next season's books. Book club goes from September to September. So if you have a book that you love, it's on your top 10 list, shoot me an email at thegoodbookclub@mail.com. Go on to our Facebook page. There is a nominations tab under the featured tab. You can just let us know, what books would you like to see us read? We will be putting out that new list next month. So it's important to get that in if you want us to cover a book that you found helpful and beneficial and that you like. So get those nominations to us. Our book for next month in July is going to be Sam Harris's The Moral Landscape. Yvonne is our discussion leader, and after our regular book club presentation, Yvonne will give us a little preview of what's in store with Sam Harris. You never can go wrong with Sam Harris for next month. So we'll look forward to that afterwards. And I think that brings us to today. Dave McCraney's How Minds Change. I've gotten so many messages and texts from people saying this book, it's changing my mind. It's blowing my mind. So we're really excited. And we have Kendall that stepped up at the very last minute. And we had a little glitch in who was going to lead. Kendall took the reins. He's been posting amazing information on our Facebook page about the book. And now we're going to have the opportunity to actually have his presentation and discussion. So thank you, Kendall. And we'll let you just take it away.
All right. Thank you so much. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So How Minds Change, the surprising science of belief, opinion, and persuasion. David McCraney. I've followed David since his early days, the You Are Not So Smart podcast, his YouTube channel, various things. This is amazing. This will go over these things, just how minds change and how to make conversations go better. So I've done a few of these presentations, and I just want to start actually with the biggest idea that jumped out to me, and this is how I would summarize it. Everyone is resistant to change, and for good reason. Some of the reasons are that we hold on to beliefs because it feels psychologically safe. I mean, think of a world where you're presented with one new fact and you completely change your worldview and everything you do in your life. It's just not practical. It's not feasible. It's not logical. We want to appear trustworthy to members of our in-group. And if you're changing your opinions all the time, historically, that wasn't good for survival. People in your in-group would view you as not trustworthy. So that's another reason why we kind of stay with our current opinions. And we're motivated by things like identity and belonging and social needs and issues of reputation and so forth. And so that is the threshold of change, which is different for everyone. Before that point, most people, when they're encountered with new information, assimilate it into their current worldview and way of thinking and behaving. I was talking with my cousin earlier this week about the concept of the Chesterton fence, and I think that fits this book perfectly. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, just realize that when you're talking to someone about facts and opinions and topics which there are a lot of stakes and they have entrenched positions, don't think of it as an opportunity to change their mind. Think of it as an opportunity to understand why they have that position in the first place. And again, I said, you know, they have a good reason for keeping their positions and all their fences are up in their lives. One of the quotes from the book says, when a person's core expectation is massively subverted in a way that makes steady change impossible, they will experience intense, inescapable psychological trauma that results in the collapse of the entire model of reality they once used to make sense of the world. Psychologists who study this kind of trauma have discovered that afterwards, people tend to take on one of two paths. Some go down a maladaptive spiral, turning to drugs or other kinds of self-destructive behavior, circling lower and lower until they hit a dark stasis. So I know a lot of you follow Britt Hartley. She talks about nihilism in the face of things like faith crises, change, and stuff like that. Like any belief we have subconsciously, we subconsciously know that the potential for that kind of, you know, bad outcome is there. So any questions or comments so far in the presentation?
I was going to say, you know, as we've been doing the podcast, this is something that I have to step back sometimes and look at because you know, people shout stuff out or you get comments that you want to jump right on and say, oh, you're wrong. And then sometimes you find out, no, there is something to what they're saying. So I've definitely had to learn to kind of step back and evaluate and say, is this, you know, correct or not? Maybe I need to take a look at it before I just respond to it. So it's certainly been something I've had to learn.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with you, Landon. I was going to bring up the same example. When you're confronted with somebody that has a completely opposite point of view, your first reaction is to go like this, right? You know, no. And that's not true because it comes from a place, you know, that only they know where that opinion comes from. And if you can find kind of a common ground at the beginning, when we will answer these, you know, comments on our podcast, we'll usually say, I understand, you know, maybe not why you would think that. That sounds kind of condescending, but I understand sort of where you're coming from. And let's, and it's true. We learn from people too that we are not always right. So it's a good exercise to be in that arena, although sometimes stressful.
Yeah, as we'll go over later, one of the best things you can do in any situation where there's a difference of opinion or you're talking about facts is to just have the stance of like, we're not debating here. I just want to understand. I want to make you feel seen and heard. And once they get the acknowledgement of their position, that's when hearts soften and minds have a chance to open. Again, we're going to go over there. There's lots of barriers to this.
Can
but
you see the hands
important
that
to
are
keep that in
raised,
mind.
Kendall, at all?
There was some pop-up
Yeah.
that happened, but it
Because
went
we
away.
have
And I
Melissa. If you can't see them, I'll help you navigate those. But Melissa has a comment, and then Yvonne. Do you see the people with their little hands up at all, or is that?
I see a list of participants that says invite or mute me, but
Okay,
if
no.
someone
All right,
wants
so
to
we
mute,
will help
let's do
you
one
with
more
the-
comment and then go on.
Okay, yeah, we have Melissa and Yvonne. So let's do those really quick. Go ahead, Melissa.
Okay.
I was just going to say thank you for that specific quote, because that was really how I felt when I say that it was that my brain broke. It was just such a fundamental change in the way my brain was working, my whole worldview, the way I viewed life and everything about it. And it was just utterly devastating and utterly freeing at the same time. So I really loved that quote that you shared.
Yeah, when I had my faith crisis, I went through existential dread for a few months. I woke up in cold sweats. All these ideas that I took for granted, now I had to figure out for myself, like, let's have some compassion for people who are different and have different points of view, because if they changed all of a sudden, they might have to go through that. I mean, who wants to wish that upon someone?
That's right. Okay, I think Yvonne had a comment, and then we'll get back to Kendall.
What she said, but when I read that, I thought this is extremely validating for everyone who's been through a faith crisis to know that this is how our brain works, So and I since have looked back in the book to try to find where that place is. So if Kendall knows what page that is in the book, let me know after.
Yeah, I can give you an approximation, but if you just message me after, that'd be easier.
Okay.
All right. So I've included some clips from an interview David McCraney did with Seth Andrews. So here's a clip of him explaining that concept. That again, if you remember nothing else, that's the big idea. They're entrenched for a reason, and it's better to understand why they have that position than to convince them out of it. There's just so many things that fence was put up there.
Safety is a big part.
Sorry, the first word he said is safety. Safety is a big part.
Safety is a big part of how we reach people, even ourselves, right?
It's the number one thing. Like so like all brains are resistant to change by default, because through the process of assimilation and accommodation, which is assimilating is making sense of the world based off what you already understand, and then accommodating is making room for something you didn't understand by expanding the range of your like abstraction space. You do that enough over the course of your life, it gets pretty dense and complicated, and your models are pretty robust, and the risk versus reward, like if you change your mind, you could become wrong, but if you don't change your mind, you might stay wrong. We tend to err on the side of, well, the model's what got me to where we're at so far. So you already have that baseline resistance that has to be overcome by enough counter attitudinal or counterfactual information to put you over a line, over a threshold. But that line gets higher and higher. The resistance gets stronger and stronger, depending on all the other motivations you have to maintain the model. And as Brooke Harrington, the great sociologist, told me, the equals MC square of social science is that the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. And when the ship is going down, we'll put our reputations on the lifeboat and we'll gladly go to the bottom of the ocean. The belonging goals trump accuracy goals every single time. And if by any intonation, if you are suggesting, whether you're reading something or it's on television or it's in a conversation, if the suggestion is you will be shamed for changing your mind, if you risk ostracism, social costs, and so on, if you like in the communication, if you like suggest that to somebody, even if you don't intend to, that's going to cause the most resistance. And the even just from like the tone of your approach, you can generate what they call reactance in therapeutic models, which is the sense that some stimulus is causing me to feel like my agency is under threat, my freedom is under threat. If you say, I think you should believe this or think this directly to a person, you should put this in your mind and take what you have in your mind out and replace it. Or so other people think you should do that. Then they, as they put it, the stimulus generates a motivational arousal to reduce the stimulus. What that means is they get pissed off and angry, and it happens. You have no choice. It just bubbles up inside you. This negative affect takes over, and you want to push away from the conversation or end it, and because the stimulus is the other person.
All right, so I love the way you summarized that. Very articulate, and the way I would put it is, when engaging with positions and preferences, you are actually dealing with an entire lifetime constructed wall composed of an avalanche of a person's past, random facts, their personal experiences, as well as the lens, largely given by their social structure, by which all those things are sifted. So any engagement you do will overwhelmingly likely, in David McRaney's kind of risk and reward model, the incentives is overwhelmingly to stick with their current way and just assimilate the new knowledge and justify it somehow into the existing structure. So, you know, this is inoculation, backfire effect. You think you're giving someone like the facts they need to make a better decision or, you know, change their mind, but in actuality, you're entrenching their current worldview, most likely. So a person only actively changes if holding on to that belief or position is so painful, they cannot maintain the old structure. That's when accommodation occurs. It's a very, very high threshold. So again, quoting from the book, when we first suspect we may be wrong, when expectations don't match experience, we feel uncomfortable and resist accommodation by first trying to apply our current models of reality to the situation. It's only when our brain finally accepts that its existing models will never resolve the incongruencies, and I would add incongruencies that are important to us, because if they're not important, we'll still assimilate them, that it will update its model by creating a new layer of abstraction to accommodate this new information. The result is an epiphany, and like all epiphanies, it is the conscious realization that our minds have changed that startles us, not the change itself. Okay, so again, I've gone over a lot of information. What responses, what thoughts do we have? Let's get some comments.
I'm considering this a little bit. I'm trying to figure it out because, you know, in the recent, if I apply this to the church, I've seen people adopt a belief or a position instantly simply because they're told to by their church leaders. I'm thinking specifically right now with the temples, where the church leaders have come out and said, "Oh, the steeple is an important part of our worship," and people have just immediately, "Oh yes, it must be because our leader said it is," and they immediately adopt it. And I don't know if that is, you know, because they believe in the church, they can believe that, and because they believe in the leader, they adopt it. So maybe that's not a new belief, but I think there might be some other ways that people change their mind. And I know for myself, I changed my mind about the church based on, as I was reading, the facts weren't aligning. So, you know, I think of someone who might have a LGBTQ child, that becomes very painful. So you start changing. I won't say it wasn't painful once I found out I was being lied to, but it would have been less painful to keep my belief, but I changed it anyway, because I just couldn't follow what I knew wasn't true. So I guess I don't know how I rectify both of those statements.
Yeah, so what I would say, using the book's model here, so we're skipping ahead a little bit, but it's totally relevant, is he talks a lot about we sift all that information through, you know, our priors is what he calls them. And so you're giving an example of like, oh, steeples weren't a thing and now they're so important because of the drop of a hat. I would argue that perhaps part of the fence that they've constructed is I can trust whatever my leaders say. That's included in their life experience by which they are sifting this new information. Perhaps, I don't know, but as part of an extended conversation that we'll go into how to make those safer, that might explain some of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that's kind of what I was thinking. I think they maybe blend. They're not as black and white as they might seem. I think they might blend in more than that. So, and since you can't see Kendall, or I don't know if you can see, Yvonne has her hand up, then Jackie and Bruce. So,
Yeah, I see the dots. I don't see how to call on them. Do I just click on their
Do you
name?
see the picture, like their face, and there's a little hand beside them?
No, that went away once I started sharing.
Oh,
Okay,
okay, it
screen
went
share.
away.
Okay, we'll
Okay,
just
so
let you
Yvonne-
know, and then
Yep.
they can just speak.
Yeah,
And
if you want to call on 1 or 2 people every time, I'll let you know when we
yeah,
move forward.
that's perfect. I
Yep. So
think
we've got
Yvonne's
3
next.
with their hands up. So Yvonne,
Yep.
you want to go?
Well, I just wondered what he thought about, that Kendall thought about, and this pertains to that, I guess, but he made the statement that the author made the statement that the speed of change is inversely proportional to the strength of our certainty. And does that mean that he's saying that the more certain we are, the faster we're going to change? And he gives those examples of the opposition to same-sex marriage and how strong the opposition was in 2012, and then all of a sudden, this flip to 2015 when the Supreme Court, and the other one was the guy that was the flat earther guy, and he was like the poster kid for that. And so do you think that that's true, that the speed of the change is inversely proportional to the strength of your certainty? What do you think of
There's
that?
there's a little nuance there. Like when you hold an extreme position, I forget which part of the book says that, like in all actuality, the percentage likelihood of that extremism is actually related to the limited experience you have. We're gonna give an example of Mother Teresa. Most people, have really strong feelings toward her, but don't actually know a lot about her. And so that's probably how I would go about explaining that particular thing, is once they learn a little bit more, and depending on how that information is taken in, is they can change quickly. But in the specific case of Charlie that you give, there's a lot of things that had to happen before he made that switch, which seems quick, but in actuality had a lot of backstory to that switch. So that's what I would say there.
Okay, Jackie.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, this book just, again, blew my mind. And I think I was so appreciative of the book giving the neuroscience and the psychology and the language to explain all of our faith crisis. We knew we had one. We knew everything had changed. We knew it was existential, but to get the wording and the language and the understanding was so important. And I so appreciated the words of the active learning, and how when you are in this state of trauma, the healthy way is to go into deep active learning. And I'm sure all of us can speak. How many of us feel like we now have a degree in Mormon history? I think I've got 2 degrees. I think I did one in psychology and history, trying to understand what happened. And I always appreciate Randy Bell, who taught us the 27X, that, when our brains change this dramatically, to rewire them, we need to hear the correct information 27 times. And I did the opposite. I went right into the void right at the beginning. I didn't do it gradually. I went smack into the void. And I kid you not, it's been 14 years trying to get out of that void and understand what happened. And I feel like this book has everything in it that we need to understand what our brains did. And I just can't be appreciative enough of whoever had us read this book in the book club for putting it in.
Yes, totally agreed. I got so much out of it. I've read several books on this topic, but this is by far the best. And I just wanted to read a quote that your comment reminded me of. This is page 15. Punctuated equilibrium, That's what they call it in biology. When creatures have the capacity to change, but there's little encouragement to do so, they mostly remain the same from one generation to the next. But when pressure to adapt increases, the pace of evolution increases in response. So I'm learning a lot about starting my own business right now. And one of the main things they repeat over and over is solve people's problem. They only care about change to solve their pain point. And that's when their minds are active and open and they're searching for something and they're willing to pay for something that's a solution to their problem. If things are going fine, I keep telling myself when I am explaining my faith crisis to other people and I get frustrated by their responses, it's actually irrational to question your beliefs if your life is going pretty well, pretty okay. It's only when you have that motivation to learn and actively want something else that your mind is plastic and wants new information, is actively seeking it. Most of the time we're actively resisting it.
Yeah, Kendall, Bruce has his hand up.
Okay. I think, yeah, I can see the hand. I don't know how to, I'm clicking on it.
You don't have to do anything, Kendall.
Yeah, just call on him.
Oh, okay. So Bruce, go ahead, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, this kind of explains, well, to me, a better understanding of my leaving. I stopped attending church right when I got home from my mission. Being gay at BYU was not a healthy thing. And BYU at that time didn't require you to go to church. And so they never kept track of you. And then for the next 30 years, I had nothing to do with the church because I knew it was a really unhealthy place for me. But I still believed the basic narrative, pre-existence, earth life test, life after this. But I'm going like, I'm fine if I'm not around my family for eternity because they're unhappy with me. And it wasn't until after 30 years that I found the ex-Mormon community and I learned the term historicity from John DeLyn's podcast. And then at one point I was listening to the Jeremy Reynolds interview on Mormon Stories and I'm going like, oh, it's all bullshit. But I had separated myself from the community 30 years before, so it wasn't my community. And so it was much easier for me then to accept all of this truth claims of the church as being totally bogus because I didn't have that relationship. I dealt with my family's unhappiness with me, but yeah, it's interesting. And Kendall, were you really upset when you found out you weren't going to get your own planet? Was that some of your existential?
Yeah, honestly, I'm still mourning the very beautiful narrative that the church gives you, like families and, creating your worlds and eternal progression. I was in love with that concept to have it all, be challenged and subverted. I was mourning those things. I think those are beautiful ideas that have a lot of, attractive value and give a lot of people, including myself, meaning. So yes, absolutely.
It's a very nice narrative, but when it's not true, it kind of diverts you from the wonderfulness of our life that we have the opportunity to have instead of playing somebody else's game of make believe.
Totally. And that's interesting, your story. I'm doing quite a bit of research on faith crisis. I actually might want to write a book all about it. And most of the research I've come across is your experience is atypical. Most people have a crisis of belonging before they have any crisis of beliefs.
Yeah, my belonging I had to deal with separately, but I moved to I moved to San Diego, broke up with my last attempted girlfriend, moved to Los Angeles, and built my whole community. And I'm still with that community to this day. And then my faith belief, disintegrated 30 years later.
All right. Okay. Let's move on. And how much more time do I have?
Oh, you've probably an hour or so. Yeah.
1 o'clock.
Excellent. Okay.
About quarter two. Yep.
Great. Yeah. There's just so much good stuff.
There's a lot.
We really could go for probably 3 days. Okay. So that's the big idea. And I love how you all resonated with it because that's what I thought was the most important thing from the book too. But there's so much more. So this is just, again, the beginning section of the book. He goes over the problem. We think our perception represents reality. We think we and everyone are rational, but in fact, we rationalize, and we have to understand that process. We assume facts speak for themselves. They do not. And facts alone don't change minds. Our brains are optimized for speed and safety, not accuracy. Our social connections matter a great deal more than facts. I would say for most people, there's a interaction of values there that goes on as well. But for most people, social is way more important. Another wrinkle to this whole equation is the growth of social media, which gives us a sense of tribal confidence in whatever we believe. We can find people and create a community around that, which gives us more entrenchment. We are naturally uncomfortable with anything different, and so we otherize and shun things that are not like us. When our beliefs are threatened, it can actually, in the brain, activate the same parts as if we're being physically threatened. And then finally, we want to think of ourselves as good and consistent. So anytime a belief or fact rubs up against our identity, there's just huge, massive resistance. So a good summary that I thought from the book, for my pages, this is page 47. It's a little off by 3 or 4 from most people's, but he says, there is no superior argument, no piece of information that we can offer that is going to change their mind. The only way we are going to change their mind is by having them change their own mind, by talking themselves through their own thinking, by processing things they've never thought about before, thinking from their own life that is going to help them see things differently. And then he goes over the process, which we'll go over later. And the top of the chart is labeled rapport. The next layer is our story, and the base of the pyramid of change is their story. He said, keep that image in mind when standing in front of someone, to remember to spend as little time possible talking about yourself, just enough to show that you are friendly and you're not selling anything. Show someone you are genuinely interested in what they have to say, then that keeps them from assuming a defensive position. You should share your story, pointing to the top layer, but it's their story that should take up most of the conversation. You want them to think about their own thinking. So I forget which part of the book talks about this. Actually, no, this is from Dan Ariely's book, Misbelief, Why Intelligent People Believe Irrational Things. And he has a whole chapter of how we're cognitive misers. We naturally don't want to think deeply, and we resist doing so until we're forced to. So that's part of our human nature in this whole equation of why we're so resistant to change. So again, here's him talking about that same topic. We have this assumption that we're perfectly rational and we do all these things in a great way, but here's how his research actually says we justify things.
An example recently would be mask wearing and getting vaccinated, which should be a neutral scientific topic, modulated by just your trust or distrust of authority, but it became politicized to the point that literally wearing a mask or not wearing a mask was a statement that I am in this group or not in this group, and people acted accordingly. And there are people who have on their deathbeds said, they were happy to have never been vaccinated. And if you were to ask the person what reasons they have to do that, this is where this really gets into the sort of where our Venn diagram overlaps, is that reasoning, psychologically speaking, is just coming up with reasons for what you think, feel, and believe. And the reasons would be plausible explanations for holding that position. And plausible means something that you intuit your most trusted peers would consider reasonable. And oftentimes the reasons we produce, they're just justifications. They're justifications for whatever. It's like you want a piece of the chocolate cake and you're saying, well, the reason I'm eating the cake is because I didn't have anything for breakfast. Like you just want the cake. Like you just try to find a reasonable justification for it. When it comes to like vaccination, like I said, I went to a anti-vaxxer conference, and when you would ask like, why do you oppose the vaccine? You would get all sorts of things that all these different justifications and reasons for why you don't want to do it. But the real reason why people didn't want to get vaccinated, according to the literature, is that the idea that a government / medical thing which you already distrust takes a chemical which you do not understand, and they want to inject that foreign thing into the body of your child via a needle that's going to hurt them, and you have no say in it. That's the thing that's generating the negative attitude. The negative attitude sits there, and then you feel it without asking for it, and then you have to come up with a justification for why you feel that way that your peers would find reasonable. That is the sort of the processing chain, and you'll find that through all sorts of stuff. Like people who are opposed to same-sex marriage, oftentimes they'd cite something in the Bible as why they were against it, but it was a cultural thing. Like their culture was against it, their upbringing was against it, their family was against it. And they were using the Bible as a justification for that thing. So the thing again there was social influence. It was the culture. So all throughout the book, I talk about all these different ways that people fall into these things, and flat earthers was like kind of the most neutral way to do it. That should be a neutral topic, right? Is the earth flat or is it round? But it's not a matter of evidence for someone who's in that community. It's a matter of community. It's a matter of, if I change my mind about this, all my friends go.
All right. So again, just lots of things in this section. Let's get some comments and reactions, and I'll look at the list now. I can see it, and I'll call on you. So raise your hand and let's have a discussion.
I was just going to say, I have a hard time with, I've got all the screens, so I can't raise my hand there. But one of the things I saw that he said there at the last is that fear of losing your community, that was huge in the church. Even when you start questioning, you knew that as soon as you said anything, you'd lose your community. And I think that's the biggest drawback to why so many people hesitate to leave, even once they have decided it's not true, is because of that loss of community.
Absolutely. Like I kind of think of it as, even when you have overwhelming evidence, there's other motivations to make that seem really small, and you just go about your life. It's just more rational to do that than to change your whole life. Bruce.
Yeah, I just came back, when I visited Landon and Rebecca in Utah. I was actually there for 9 days visiting various family members who, for the most part, are believing members. Here and there, a couple of never Mormons and stuff. But, how do I interact with my family? I mean, I have a gut desire to get them to understand that it's all bullshit. But then I'm coming to the conclusion, like, I have an older brother and his wife, 10 years older. They're all my only immediate family left. And they're going to end their lives with the narrative of the church. And so I'm going, how do I interact with them? I'm trying just to be the fun gay uncle, but also I talked to one of my nephews who's going on a mission, and he is not exactly an Orthodox believer, and he doesn't follow the rules exactly. And he's going later this year, and he's already got his call. But we did talk about community, and I'm wondering if an approach isn't like just saying, I don't have community with the family as much as I used to, just that concept. Because I think that's less threatening than saying, Joseph Smith married other men's wives and, treasure digger and stuff like that, but maybe approaching family so that they kind of understand my distancing myself from the community. I don't know. This book made me think a lot about the approach of whether I should continue trying to help my family understand the reality of things as I see it or not. That's my comment.
Yeah, so just the broad strokes of this book: tell your stories, connect with people on their values, Get them to talk about their experiences after you share your experiences. Like all these things are way more effective than here's a condemning fact about the thing you hold. Like that will cause, I forget the term, reactance, assimilation, almost every time. But if you make it, more about, stories and things like that, and understand the process of like how our minds reason is like, you could have 1,000 of those reasons that are absolutely condemning of the thing, but those 1,000 things that are so important to you have no chance against, if what's important to them is, but I have a scout leader or a young women's leader that's helping my child, like all the facts in the world are not going to overcome what's important subjectively to them. And you have to understand what their fence is constructed by. Okay, Joe.
Yeah, I think, I love how in the beginning of the book, one of the realizations he came to, or at least he was pointing out, is that we may not be successful in convincing anyone. And we have to accept that. In other words, go through the process, let them kind of discover that for themselves. But if that doesn't work, you're kind of left with, okay, I guess we're going to agree to, you know what I mean? You can't just make the sale. You know what I mean? It's like, you have to come to a realization, like Bruce, what he was saying is maybe his family won't ever come around. Maybe he just has that thing. And those are hard things to like deal with,
Yeah, and we have to have compassion. Again, like if they do change, like what's their life going to be like? Are they going to transition as healthily as we did? Like we don't know. And then this was probably my second biggest idea from the book. This is page 50. A canvasser's reasoning can't be copied and pasted into another person. The facts that matter to them probably don't matter to the other person at all. Like we think that these things are so valuable and so important, but subjectively to the other person, do they really care what happened 150 years ago? Like, does that really matter to them? Like, subjectively, probably not at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or questions before we move on?
Yeah, I've got one.
An example.
Yeah.
I've dealt a lot with the ex-Mormon community, running the LA meetup group for years and going to different John Dehlin events and Thrive. And the thing that always amazes me is how effective having an LGBT child or grandchild is in making that like entrance into the thought process, because now the way I'm looking at it is that love for the child or the grandchild is the more important relationship than with the church. And that's where the schism starts, because it's something more important to them than community. It's the family, and especially the parent-child. When a child is young and you can tell often, at least my experience with little gay boys, everybody knows they're a little gay boy from early on. And when the church members start treating them poorly before even puberty or any self acknowledgement of them being gay, that puts a real wedge in with the loving parent. And I think that's kind of where the church has a real problem, because community, while really important, if you start breaking up that bond between parent and child or grandparent and grandchild, that's where they're going to have the problem. Just my thought.
Yeah, if you look at it as an equation, which I'm that type of logical thinker, when that realization happens, like, hey, if I continue with this, belief system, it's going to hurt this person I love. I mean, that changes the risk reward dynamic internally, often dramatically. I mean, before these were benign beliefs that affected other people, didn't have anything to do with me. And now all of a sudden it has a lot to do with me. That activates our brain and puts us into a mode where we're open to change, to actual accommodation. Again, let me go over the definitions of accommodation and assimilation. So assimilation is adjusting an existing mental schema to incorporate new information, but no major change has happened. We just use the new information in our existing worldview. Accommodation occurs when an individual actually creates new schemas to accommodate information that does not fit their existing models. That's a big, big distinction. And the love of a grandchild in that relationship, when an entity like a church is saying you have to treat them this way and believe these things about them, those two things will be in conflict, and one has to give. Okay, let's move on. So again, we kind of have this assumption that our beliefs are based off of facts, and we're all rational, and we come to things, the same way. If they just had the same facts as we did, they would believe the same way we do, but that's actually not the case. Going back to what Landon and I were discussing earlier, is how it really works is any evidence or information that we come across is filtered by our priors, our life experience, and our many, many assumptions and subjective values. And that's how we get all these disagreements, even though we're working with what seems to be like the same information. I don't know. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Landon? Oh no, you're now muted. You were unmuted before.
Yes, and Kendall, I accidentally muted you when I was trying to unmute
Okay.
me. Yeah, I was going to say this was a big one for me because on the LGBTQ issue, I had no experience. Nobody I knew was gay. Nobody that I interacted with that I knew of was gay, and so it was very easy to just follow the church leaders and do whatever they said, and read the Bible and the Book of Mormon and go to church, and you learn that was a sin. And it wasn't until the November 15th policy, when that came out, I kind of was going, that's not right. That doesn't sound right. But then I started hearing actual personal stories from people, and they weren't people I knew. I can't remember where I heard it, but I remember a parent talking about how they had several kids at that point. The father had left and married a man, but he still supported the church. He still supported them being raised in the church, and the mother was raising them in the church. And at the time, I was the young men's leader or scoutmaster, and she talked about how bad it was that her son, he turns 12 and he can't get the priesthood. And I'm thinking, well, how does he go to scout camp and sit there while everybody else at scout camp is a deacon, and he can't be simply because of a choice that his parents made? And when I started putting that personal touch on it, that's when I really started to change my mind and say, this is not good. This is not a right policy. And that then just snowballed to where I changed my whole attitude on the thing. So I really think those personal stories and actually knowing someone, he talked about that in the book, how spending time with each other. I know in the military, when they started mixing the racism, that's when racism really went away. It's getting to know people that have a different belief and understanding it, that you then accept it. And I think that's really a key to changing minds.
Absolutely. On page 57, he says, in their book, Get Out the Vote, political scientists Donald Green and Alan Gerber examined more than 100 published papers detailing attempts to influence opinions with mail-outs, canvassing, phone calls, television ads. Green and Gerber concluded it was highly unlikely that any of it made any impact, almost zero. And in the rare instances in which such communication techniques did alter people's opinions, people tended to revert back to their original position within a few days after they alleged their change, because of social networks reasserting their influence. Which is why when we get to the last part of the presentation of the how to change, telling stories and making it personal about their stories and your personal experiences, I mean, it dramatically alters the likelihood that someone might change their opinion. In the social sciences, 10% is huge. And that's exactly what Landon is saying is true, is when you make it about a person, when you make it personal, that's when minds are open and have a higher likelihood of change. But this slide, again, just to understand, because he uses it a lot, is whatever information we are giving someone, we have to understand their priors. If we haven't addressed that, it's like we're talking to a wall, and we're more likely going to entrench their position than change anything. And he goes into great detail about this process. I didn't follow all of the science behind it. He goes over our retinas and everything, but I got the broad overtone. So we're going to go through some examples here of just how different our perceptions are when we are objectively looking at the same thing. So here we go. So this looks like what? If you were to just describe it in words, I would say it's a picture of a pie. It's maybe slightly off color, but I see red strawberries, and what I would say is a strawberry, dessert of some type. But in actuality, there is no red whatsoever in this picture. It's our brain already being used to looking at something that has those bumps and that shape and being like, you know what? That should be red. And so it's projecting red onto the image when in objective reality, there is no red at all. He explains this as this has to do with what our brain does in cases of what he calls substantial uncertainty. The brain will use its past experience to create illusions of what it thinks ought to be there, but is not. In other words, in novel situations, the brain usually forces itself to see what it expects to see, not what is actually true. And then on page 86, this image looks like a bowl of red strawberries, but the image contains 0 red pixels. When you look at the photo, no red light enters your eyes. Instead, your brain assumes the image is overexposed by blue light. It just turns down the contrast a bit, adds a little color where it was removed, and it means that you experience red when you look at those strawberries, but it's not coming from the image. If you've grown up eating strawberries and spent a lifetime seeing strawberries as red, when you see the familiar shape of strawberries, your brain assumes they should be red. The red you see in this illusion is generated internally. It's not reality. An assumption that's made after the fact, and this is key, without your knowledge. It's a lie told to you by your visual system to provide you with what ought to be the truth, but what is not actually true. The famous example of the dress, which we could talk about a lot, but I just want to go over the one detail I learned, and it has to do with, again, your priors of exposure to light. If you've been most of your life exposed to mostly artificial light, which is yellow under about 3200 Kelvin, you're going to see the dress as blue and black. But if you've exposed most of your life to natural light around 5000 to 6000 Kelvin, which I subjectively like the bright white bulbs even, I don't have hardly any yellow light in my entire houses that I've lived in, you will probably experience the dress as white and gold. And so it depends on what your brain is conditioned to think, that you will see the dress as one or the other. And on page 83, he says, like all two-dimensional images, whether blobs of paint or pixels on a screen, if the lines and shapes seem similar enough to things we've seen in the past, that's how our brain will turn them into things, like the Mona Lisa or a sailboat, or in the case of a bistable image, like these ambiguous things that we've shown, either a duck or a rabbit, which is another example from the book, a picture that you can interpret either way. But the dress was something new, an interjacent bistable visual illusion. Bistable because each brain settles on one interpretation at a time, but interjacent because each brain settles on only one of 2 possible interpretations, which makes it different from the duck rabbit, because you can, once you kind of prime your brain, make your brain see one or the other after you have that knowledge. But with the dress, it literally has to do with what light you were exposed to. You can't train your brain out of that very easily.
Kendall, you just got muted. There we go.
Cool. Do we want the other quote, or do we want a little bit of discussion here?
Let's do
I'll read the quote. There are more than 30 steps in visual processing before an image reaches consciousness. You are only aware of the result, not that process. At no point in processing the image of the dress did anyone ever feel uncertain that led to this disambiguation. It's the fact that uncertainty is eliminated stealthily, that the processes are unconscious and seemingly undebatable, that leads to our most indistractable disputes. When our differing experiences and motivation cause us to disambiguate differently, we can't help but disagree with great certainty. But when we disagree in this way, we don't know why we are disagreeing. The result is that we argue endlessly over our subjectivity to convince one another of something that doesn't feel subjective. It feels like raw, unfiltered, unassailable truth. In psychology, there's a term for this. When your disambiguations feel like undeniably true things. It's called naive realism, and it's the belief that you perceive the world as it is, free from assumption, interpretation, bias, or limitations on your senses. The late psychologist Lee Ross, who helped popularize the term, told me that it leads to many of us to believe that when we arrive at our beliefs, attitudes, and values after careful rational analysis through unmediated thoughts and perceptions, unaware that different priors actually lead to different disambiguations. You believe that you've been mainlining pure reality for years, and it was your intense study of the facts that led to your conclusions. But according to Ross, this is why people on each side of a debate believe their side is the only one rooted in reality. When disambiguations collide, like with the dress, people find it difficult to understand how the other side could possibly see things differently when the evidence seems obvious that they should. And we'll just do this clip and then get some comments because he goes over the similar concept here.
It could be interpreted either way, but brains settle on only one or the other. And that's what generates this powerful disagreement because of something called naive realism. I don't know if you talk about this much on the show, but naive realism, the great Lee Ross, who I was able to interview before he passed away, the psychologist who spoke mostly about that. Naive realism is until you read too many philosophy books or had too many bong rip conversations in a dorm room, you may not be aware that reality is not a one-to-one replica that you experience in here. It's just a representation. It's a virtual landscape that the mind generates. Until you're aware of that, you are in a state of naive realism where you assume that your eyes are cameras and your memories are video recordings, and that what you see, think, and feel is exactly how reality really, really is. And there's no it could be interpreted either way, but brains could be parts of the color spectrum you can't see and so on. But that concept can be expanded to anything. There are all sorts of other aspects of our cognition that we still have a bit of naive realism about. We feel like because we're feeling it and thinking it, that it must be accurate in some way. And it takes a lot of intellectual humility to get out of that frame. The duck rabbit's one way to go about it, but the dress is a higher order version of it, because like you said, in that war, it's with the banners, I'd put the dress on there more likely, because I remember Pascal Wallish, the neuroscientist, said it is not inconceivable that people could form political camps around one of these two interpretations. Weirder things have happened in history. And oftentimes cultures do form from just that little bit of grit that makes a cultural pearl of one particular interpretation of an outcome. One of the oldest studies in psychology is called They Saw a Game. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It was a football game between two opposing universities, and there were a lot of infractions, and they would show people a video reel of the game, and they would ask them to mark down who caused the most injury. And of course, people would pick the team that was on their team would be the one that was in the right, the other team was in the wrong, even though they were both watching the exact same film. It could be played over and over again. We see this consistently all throughout everything. Right now with the trials that are taking place in Congress, and This could be evergreen, by the way, because anytime anybody listens to this, I bet there's somebody on trial in front of Congress, and the interpretation is, if you are in favor of one side or the other, you will interpret everything you're seeing as evidence that my side is right. And if you're not, you'll see all the evidence as total justification for how you feel, that it's evidence that shows that that your side is wrong and my side is right, no matter what side you're on.
All right, so what thoughts do we have about this phenomenon, naive realism, the fact that our brains construct reality, it's not actually objective, and that should give us intellectual humility? Bruce.
Yeah, this part of the book I found really interesting. When that dress thing came out, I saw it a couple times on Instagram or something and just clicked past. I'm going like, it's gold and white. I don't even want to think about it. But I remembered it. And when he started talking about it and giving the explanation, I'm going like, okay, I swim outdoor in an outdoor pool 4 days a week, and I walk outside. And so I have a lot of natural sunlight, and that's probably why I see the gold and white. And I'm going like, okay, then other people who spend a lot of time, say, indoors, are seeing something completely different. Then how do I apply this to, my beliefs on how the world works and my difficult relationship with my family and the Mormon church and stuff like that? Yeah, that really was kind of eye-opening to me, going like, okay, somebody may be seeing things so differently, and there's a reason they're seeing things so differently. So.
Absolutely. That goes exactly in line with what Rebecca said right at the very beginning. Even with people that you're an expert on the topic, you should still have the humility to be like, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe they have a point. And in Dan Ariely's book, that's one of the major things that he emphasizes, is you have to go into any conversation equally ready to have your mind change, because people sense that. And if you don't have that humility, it's going to be more of a debate than an effective conversation, which we'll go over later. Okay, Landon.
Yeah, this one was really interesting to me. In fact, when you were showing the strawberries, I actually took and narrowed down with my finger and started looking at the strawberry, so it didn't look like a strawberry anymore, and it turned to gray when I did that. When it didn't look like a strawberry anymore. The dress, I was trying that with the dress, and I couldn't make any changes to it, but the strawberry, when I focused in just a small part, it did turn gray. So that was interesting. But this part really, as I started thinking about it, it kind of changed, because I think in the church, say what is truth. So what is truth? And in church, there's one truth. There's only one truth. But this started making me think, there's really more than one truth. To one person, that dress is gold and white, and to another, it's blue and whatever the other color was. And I started thinking about my sons who are colorblind. If you were to show me the world the way they see it, I would say that's not how the world is. But to them, that's how the world is. So to both of us, the world we see is truth, but it's a different truth. And you can do the same thing with astronomy. You look at it through the infrared, you look at it through natural light, you look at it through, all the different wavelengths, and the same planet looks completely different depending on how you look at it and what light waves you use. So that got me thinking that there's more than one truth, and that we can't always just say, well, because your truth isn't my truth, that makes your truth untrue. We have to look at, it could be true to you, something that's not true to me could be true to you, and vice versa.
Yeah, and that attitude, exactly what you just said, is repeated in the book, and it lowers people's defenses, and it makes the stakes lower. It just dramatically heightens the possibility that a conversation about differences will go better. But you have to make that shift. I mean, like, that's one of the things I loved about being in the church was the certainty of, like, we are the true church. We have the truth. We have the authority. And it just gave me such confidence. And now I'm like, gosh, anything could be true. I'm open to anything, which is, led to a lot of learning. But when we're discussing things with people, we have to make that shift from, like, what we see and think represents reality to all this nuance and possibility for, hey, we got it wrong, or we're making a judgment when we think it's a fact. I mean, we just have to remain so open and humble.
Steph has
All
her
right. Any other comments before we move on?
Steph has her hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Steph.
Yeah, I hope this is on point, but this is something that was occurring to me as you were talking about the last few slides. I think sometimes we have to go a step before that, even though, and establish, are the people we're talking to capable of even examining what truth is? Because I know for me, I've been very hard on myself that it took me, this many years to go through this faith crisis, because I did have gay friends and Black friends, and I never was able to examine those things. And a lot of it was because of we were heavily involved in the Charlie Square shooting years ago, me and my husband. And so the trauma of that, and then the years after that, really prevented us mentally from getting out of that fight or flight enough to have conversations where I could even acknowledge my own perceptions or have those conversations. And I feel grateful I can now, but I think when I approach people now, I know they have those different perceptions. But before I even examine those, I want to know, are they in a state of mind where I need to help them? I can help them heal to a point where they can examine truth, if that makes sense.
Right, and that's why all three of the methods we'll go over are really hyper focused on that. How do we get people into a state of, like you described, versus like we're just going to hammer them, we're going to imply without meaning to that they're dumb and wrong and they have to change, and like that is just, I mean, it's so enlightening to see like, wow, this way that you think is rational if you assume it's all about facts is actually very inefficacious once you understand the processes that are really going on.
Yeah, Jenny has.
Yeah, Jenny. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. I love that comment. And so I just graduated with a master's degree in mental health therapy. And one of the things that I studied a lot was intergenerational transference of trauma. And it's become clear in my mind that the people in the Mormon faith come from traumatized backgrounds. They had to hold on to their faith so strongly because where else were they going to go? Like they couldn't turn to the enemy because the enemy might kill them. And they were going through really difficult things. And so in their mind, they have to build a narrative. Like, this is completely true. Therefore, it makes them able to go across the plains and all of these things. But they saw family members killed and starvation and all of these things. Like that trauma, I think that the community is still dealing with.
Absolutely. And that goes into our priors, that the stakes are higher. We have to hold on to these because people we love died for this. It has to be true. All sorts of things go into this. Rebecca.
Yeah, that's funny. I was thinking exactly along those lines about how dramatic and traumatizing Mormonism actually is. And that never struck me until I was in primary, and they would have a time where the kids had to get up and give a family story, just to share testimony based on something that happened in the past. And these stories were extraordinarily traumatic and violent, especially when they went to pioneer era, right? Joseph was hiding in my great-great-great-grandmother's bed, and the men with the guns came. These are little kids telling these stories. And just week after week, this is their heritage. This is, as you said, you're proud. This binds you to the religion. Even more recent stories. My grandma, they burnt down her church building when she was young. I mean, these were violent stories, but almost a badge of honor. But then how traumatic. And I kept thinking, the mom standing up there with the little kid and they're giving this story. I thought, this mother would never let this kid even know this story at this age, let alone tell it, except for that it's a Mormon faith promoting story. So that is very real, the generational trauma. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to reemphasize, like when you're talking to someone about a topic they're really invested in, like, their church, like imagine as if like whatever you want them to know or understand, like you are attacking their great-great-grandfather that went across the plains, that their pioneer, sacrifice. Like, why would you attack someone's great-great-grandfather? You know, when you're talking negatively about Joseph Smith, that's what they're hearing. You know, we have to understand that process, and then people's behavior makes a lot more sense. I'm going to read another quote here. I think I can do it midway and it will make sense. This is page 99. You assume that anyone who disagrees with your conclusions probably just doesn't have all the facts yet. If they did, they'd already be seeing the world like you do. This is why we continue to ineffectually copy and paste links from our trusted sources when arguing our points with those people who seem misguided, crazy, or uninformed, or just plain wrong. The problem is that this is exactly what the other side thinks will work on you. The truth is that we're always reaching our conclusions through disambiguation, and I would add our past priors, which is part of that. But all the work is done in different brains without us knowing what's really going on. We just experience in consciousness the result. You think you are experiencing the world as it truly is, and when a lot of people are sure their version of reality is really real, at the same time, that a lot of other people are sure that no, in fact, their version is, that's when you get the arguments that break the internet, like the dress, but also like the Inquisition, the 100 Years' War, QAnon, anti-mask protests, etc. So it's this process of our past has shaped what this new piece of information means for us. Okay, let's move on here.
It could be.
Okay, so we've talked about the biggest idea, the problem. Now let's get into the things that work and help. So some things that help from this book. Realize that being wrong feels exactly the same as being right when you haven't taken the active energy to deeply question your beliefs, which again is irrational to do so. If your life is working for you, the feeling has absolutely the same as if you're right. You don't know that you're wrong. People are being rational by avoiding thinking. You know, we don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater by everything that we encounter. Truth can't be established until we agree on the definitions and conditions. He goes into detail on that in chapter 4, where you have to talk about what words mean before you can make any headway into people. And I've done this a lot. I've read a lot of Karl Popper, who emphasizes doing this. And most people, they don't really have an interest in going that deep. So just kind of adjust your expectations to know that, like, you know, I don't want to spend an hour defining the word no, or defining the word, you know, reasonable, or whatever the word is that you're arguing about. But that is required to agree on what is truth. Understand that when a person is threatened, people react defensively. Like he gives several examples when you talk about something and you don't intend it, they could be interpreted as, you want to take away my freedom. If I change my position, the very national identity of this country is at stake. And they're maybe not aware that the stakes are that high for them, because they haven't reflected on their motivations for that position, but just be aware that those are what's going on underneath. Our identity, our preferences, our potential choices, even the definition of what is good and right could be at stake. We can't copy and paste our reasoning onto another person. We've gone over that several times. So the big idea here is, don't try to change minds. Instead, and this is what all three of the how that we'll go over does, is you try, and that's a key word, you're not always going to succeed. You just try to set the circumstances whereby people change their minds themselves.
Okay.
Subtract the yellow luminant, giving you a black and blue dress.
Okay, Kendall, we lost your video for a while, and now your video's flickering off.
Glitching? Okay, let me. .
We can't hear you, but we can see you okay.
Okay.
Now we can.
Now you can hear me. Okay. So anyway, he's going to go over that process and give some more of those helpful tips on how we can do that. Get people into a more malleable state of mind.
The yellow luminate giving you a black and blue dress. So your priors, the priors you bring to the situation, in this case, visual priors, perceptual priors, are what determines how you will disambiguate the ambiguous. And this is something that I use to get into the idea that we were talking about here, this subjective reality solipsism thing, which is, that's true for every single thing that we encounter in life. All the experiences we've had thus far, all the priors we bring to the situation, when something is uncertain or ambiguous, we will disambiguate it via those priors. And there's a model that they use in that the neuroscientists who studied the dress is called SURFPAD. And I love this, this framing. Substantial uncertainty in the presence of ramified or forked prior assumptions will lead to substantial disagreement. Ramified meaning branching, which just means there's a line, and above that line is all the things going on in your brain, all the nature, nurture, and experiences you've had thus far. And when you encounter something ambiguous, you will disambiguate it through those things. And if your disambiguation is different from somebody else, you will arrive at a completely different subjective reality from them, and you might disagree a whole lot. And it relates to everything we've talked about so far, whereas you can imagine people looking at the dress and saying, it's this color, no, it's this color. And if you wanted to get into a debate about which color it is, a debate in which one person ends up being the winner or the loser, right or wrong, you will get nothing out of that, because neither person's right, neither person is wrong. It's a matter of trying to investigate, why do you see it differently? And unless you get into that frame, you'll never even think about approaching it from the perspective of, oh, this must be something to do with neurons and retinas and visual priors. All that will be left off the table if you stay in that debate frame. So that's how I get into that topic. And that's something I think is a really useful way, a very neutral way to talk about these topics.
So Chris Voss has a book about negotiation, and he talks a lot about stances. Like when you're talking to people, you can have like an authority stance, an expert stance, and these kinds of things imply that, you know, I'm above you. And as mammals, we have a very keen sense of that. And so when someone talks down to us, we're more defensive. But this is one of the first big keys. It was very subtle there at the end. But if you just change that stance to like, I'm going to convince you of something, which again, you might not say that that's your intent, but oftentimes, you know, that is what you're doing. And if you really work on your heart to be like, no, I don't want to change your mind. I just want to understand where you're coming from. That conversation, that stance is just so much more welcoming and non-defensive, and has a higher likelihood of going somewhere productive than, you know, what our default might be. So any thoughts on that one tip before we go over his other tips? Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Oh, actually, I just took the thought off. Though my main question with all of this is, okay, how do we implement this with dealing with friends and family as it relates to the church, and between friends and family, how it relates to the very divided politics we have in the US. And, you know, I mean, that goes from, you know, masking, vaxing, you know, political parties, which is all intertwined with the church stuff too, at least in my family it is. So yeah, just trying to figure out what's the approach that we take that can lead to a better outcome as far as relationships, and I guess in my view, helping people see a more rational view of reality, but then maybe my view of reality is not rational. Rebecca.
Yeah, and that's my first question. If I can put you on the spot and ask you a hard question, if not, that's fine.
Sure.
So on a scale from 1 to 10, this is hard for all of us, but I really truly believe this is where it starts. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much respect do you personally, Bruce, have for people who continue to be active and believing in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? That's a vital question.
I have more respect if they're not actively doing harm to others. You know, if I have a fair amount of family members that are wishy-washy Mormons, you know, the closest ones to me, I'm sure don't pay tithing. I'm sure, you know, I see stuff on Instagram that they're off doing fun stuff on Sundays. They're very kind of Jack Mormon adjacent, but I still think they believe. That's no problem. But when you talk about people like the Q15 who seem to me to be actively trying to harm people, my respect for them is considerably lower. And then when you go down to the crazy QAnon political stuff, my respect is kind of low, but you know, kind of moderate conservatives. My respect is closer because I was probably in their position a few years ago. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, and honestly, this is again hard for all of us, but I don't know another word. I've only, you know, been out for just over a year. I testify that one of the greatest areas for growth, if that's true, is you got to work on yourself and change your heart and be like, okay, on the surface, their beliefs seem totally crazy and dumb, and they're harming people. And in your Chesterton fence, that harm is a majority part of why you hold that belief. And they should respect and understand that. There's no guarantee that they will, but your task is to be like, okay, but to them, the harm that happens is not a big deal in their fence. What's really important to them is all the good the church does, and they focus on that, and how can I respect what is important to them on this belief? And once they feel that respect from you, the conversation will go better. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, when you use the word testify, I learned this from a Mormonish podcast. I think you should replace it with "I shit you not."
Okay, I'll try. Okay, we had Rebecca and then Melissa.
Yeah, what you said absolutely perfectly crystallized my experience over the last couple months with a TBM son who got married yesterday. Now, when you talk about harm, I stood outside the temple. I didn't see my son get married. You know, I did not see that moment where he said, you know, I do and all of that. I didn't see it. When they asked in the ceiling room, will the parents please come forward? A cousin and his wife stood up and stood for me and my husband, who were just sitting in the lobby. We were just feet away, right? So was that harm? I could see that as incredible harm. And I could have done this for months, you know, but I sort of, you know, the book helps, and just the idea that they don't really know what they're doing. And in his mind, my son, the harm is not being married in the temple, right? So I had to just arrive at that and say, someday, maybe, I hope he doesn't ever see what he did, because that would be devastating, you know, but maybe he will. I don't know. But you have to be okay with yourself. You have to work on yourself. You have to be able to arrive at a place where you understand, I love this person. I love my son. He would never intentionally do something so painful to me, but he's unable not to do it, if that makes sense. So even though it sounds terrible, you do have to kind of work on yourself and get to a place of peace. And in my case, just wanted to preserve the relationship, right? I would never do anything that would disrupt that. I love his new wife. It's just so exciting. And I tried to focus on all that. Although there was incredible harm if I really let myself think about it. It hurt a lot. You know, there were some moments sitting in the lobby where waving at everybody else walking past where I'm just like, just because you guys believe in this myth, you get to go see my son get married. I mean, look, I'm processing right now. But again, it is just, you know, you have to just look at yourself and say, what do I value? And they really, with their point of view, can't help what they're thinking or doing, regardless of possible harm.
And even a little bit more than that, like that implication of like they don't know what they're thinking and doing, like that's kind of an authoritative, I know better than you, I'm looking down on you stance.
Yeah,
and
I'm
we've
saying
got to
it
work on
wrong.
that.
Yeah.
Like I would start with what you did very well, which is connecting on values.
Right.
You know, like do you value your son's relationship with his wife? You do. So does he. That's why he's going to the temple.
And that's
You
what I
have the
arrived at.
same
Yes.
values. And he wants that to be successful, and
Yes.
you want that to be successful. So we have so many things that are similar. And this is more from Dan Ariely's book, Misbelief, that we can choose to focus on. But naturally, we wanted to hone in on those differences and those harms. But the canvas is so big, and we have so many choices on where to take the conversation and understanding what is important of the whole big picture to them versus of that whole big picture to us. I mean, there's just so much there. Okay.
And I'm sure that he said to himself, my mom doesn't know what she's doing. You know,
exactly,
come on board and attend my wedding. I'm devastated that she can't be there. You know, and when you arrive at that, then you can come to a place of peace.
Right, exactly. You've got to have that respect. I could be missing something. Like, I mean, like, again, I'm recently out of my faith transition, but I would, on some days, I would love the church to be true. Like, I'm still open to that. I don't know everything. But you know, from what I do know, it's pretty, you know, a hard pill to swallow. I just don't think it's rational to conclude that from what I know. But am I open to new information? Absolutely. Okay, Melissa and Jenny.
I think this is my hard thing because I'm only a couple years out and I still have, you know, a lot of that anger phase where I cannot be rational about it. I'm absolutely fine if they want to do books and angels and gold plates and visions and all of that, prophets, whatever. I'm fine with all of that and I can be absolutely rational and kind of considerate. But when it comes to my kid that almost died because of this stuff, I have no rationality. I have no chill in me. I just can't be okay with it. And I know that that's making it worse, that it's entrenching them in their beliefs, but I have no rationality. I have no give. I have no patience. I have nothing in me that is okay with that belief system. And that's where I really struggle because I can't, you know, I'm making it worse because I can't be logical and reasonable and okay with it, but also I can't. I'm not there. And it's just so hard because, like we were talking about earlier, when it's, you know, it's somebody else's kid or somebody else who's LGBTQ, you can kind of just ignore it. But when it's in your house and it's your child that almost dies, then rationality just goes out the window and it's just not possible anymore.
And that's why you absolutely, and all of us, need a community that understands that part of this belief for you. That is a huge part. That is the biggest part of your Chesterton fence. And the other side is probably never going to really get that. I mean, that degree of caring and love that you have and the harm that you've seen for someone you love, like, they don't get that. They haven't had that same experience. Go ahead.
And I think.
Go ahead, Gene. We
can't. I can't hear really what he's saying.
I think his sound is a little bit off.
Okay, Jenny, are you still here? You had your hand raised?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Before I say this next comment, though, I just want to say, like, I'm so sorry for the pain that I'm seeing in people, right? Like, it's hard. Like, being in it is hard. And I've experienced that too. I also want to say, like, I'm trying to stay, which has been hard. And because of so many different things. And one thing that that has helped me, I guess, and helped me in just relationships in general, where I feel like I'm continuing to be hurt, but I want to stay, is like, what is my expectation of that person? Because if I expect them to show up in a certain way, if I expect them to show up understanding, if I expect them to behave in a certain way that I deem healthy and they don't meet that expectation, then I get angry and hurt and all of these things. And so I've had to readjust the expectation of, if I have an interaction with you, it's probably going to go this way. And if it doesn't, and it's healthy, then I can be happy. But if it goes the way I think it's going to go, it seems not to like activate me as much because it was expected. And I'm choosing to continue to have that interaction with that person. I don't know if that helps everyone, but at least for me, that is what has helped in some ways.
Yeah, and just the point I want to emphasize, I know this is probably unpopular for everyone who will hear it, but I'm just this type of guy. Both sides have to hold space that multiple things can be true at the same time. Any organization that you can name causes great harm. They also do good. Can we find it within ourselves to honor what is important to the people that, choose to align themselves with something we disagree with for different reasons? Again, we can't copy and paste our rationale onto someone else. They are different people. Different things are emphasized and important to them, and we have to find a way to honor what is important to them. At least if our goal is connection and a good relationship and better conversations. Again, if anger is more important to you, then there are ways to do that well. But I just would recommend that we analyze what our goals are and what the effects might be for, just like Jenny said, our expectations of individuals, especially in individual conversations. Okay, so did we get to everyone? Oh, Bruce, okay, real quick.
Yeah, I just had a comment. Jenny was talking about making an effort to stay in, and I've seen in the post-Mormon community or the progressive Mormon community that concept, which I think is really valid, but sometimes it comes to the point where whatever you're saying or doing, then the organization starts pushing you out or kicking you out. It reminds me of Natasha Helfer, saying something about masturbation being, normal and healthy, and that started her way out of the church involuntarily, because, if you stick up for something or say something that you believe that the church finds threatening, then they will push you out, which then also starts your wedge into the relationship. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. You can distance yourself, but then you can also be forced out, depending on how much you've disclosed about beliefs or approach.
Yeah, that was my experience, is like my values conflicted with staying in the church as I got new information. And I feel like I stand for certain things. And once I learned, more things about this organization, I couldn't feel like it was aligned with what was important to me in my life. But that was a subjective, Kendall-centric decision. I can't copy and paste that onto someone else who, believes that ritual and, community, all these other things are important to them. I mean, that's a very honoring reason to stay, and we have to acknowledge and really respect that. Okay, let's move on. Here's another clip. Again, it kind of gives you a snapshot of when it goes well. He gives us David McRaney.
All of that gets assuaged by addressing it directly, building rapport in the conversation early, generating this sense of trust with the other person. You're trying to create an environment that's like, if you go watch a movie with one of your friends and you're pretty sure you love it, and you get out and you can't wait to talk to them about it, and they say, I hate that movie, and you don't think, well, we can never talk to each other ever again, or I don't trust you anymore. What you end up doing is getting into one of these like shoulder to shoulder conversations where you're like, well, tell me what you didn't like about it. I'll tell you what I did like about it. And you kind of move each other a little bit. That can only happen in an environment of trust and safety. And you're totally right. Like the fact that you can watch on and be an argument taking place between two people, you don't have any of these pushback feelings. And there's even something called narrative transport in the literature, where this is why a lot of movies and books are so successful at generating change in the culture, because you are an onlooker and there's no urge to create counter arguments while you're watching the thing. You just let it happen passively, and you can allow the arguments to sit out there, and you can take something from it that if you were being told this, if you were being pushed in some way, you would push back, and the other person would push back harder, and you get into a loop of pushing, and you leave the opportunity to learn anything from each other.
Well,
So creating rapport, that trust, that's a precondition to conversations going well that, again, like facts are not going to help with. Okay, so finally, the how. Step 0, ask yourself, why is it important to change that person's mind? You really have to be honest. Do I want them to agree with me? Do I want them to justify my anger? Like, there's a lot of things that maybe we don't want to acknowledge, and we give, easier answers like, well, I just care about truth and I just want everyone to be rational. I say those things all the time, but I think if I really looked at my heart, there's other motivations that I have to understand before I'm ready to have that conversation. So your goals should probably be more modest. I mean, that wall that has the avalanche of stuff, maybe instead of changing someone's mind, your goal is to just build rapport. One thing I like to do is just compare. I want to understand where you are, and do I have your position correctly? I summarize in my own words. If I can do that, I've learned something. I've learned what they believe and why they believe it. I love learning. And even if they don't have the same position as I do, I've still learned why they hold their position. And more importantly, I've articulated it in a way that satisfies them, that builds trust and shows that I'm acting in good faith. Or have your goal be to, what we'll get into in street epistemology, is have the goal be have people reflect on their reasoning process. I mean, that goal just opens up the door to so many different avenues to help someone in their life, because once you reason well, you can reason in other areas. But if you never understand your own reasoning, you're probably going to use the same hammer to think every situation requires that one tool. Help people unpack their life experiences. In most of the methods that the book goes over, that's where the focus is their personal experiences and just listening to them and helping them go through that. So that's where the bulk of the conversation should be. That's where the bulk of our opinions are actually shaped, is our just subjective past experiences. And then we've talked about this one extensively. Our own positions, we should hold more tentatively, have intellectual honesty, be open to the fact that we could be wrong, even very wrong. And then shift from this debate positioning to the, we're on this journey as friends together. Let's compare, let's learn from one another. And I just want to understand, and let's connect on, values. Everyone, when they zoom out high enough, have a lot of the same values. We care about people. We want the world to be better. We might disagree on the methods, but those core values are way more common than they are scarce. And then finally, the book talks about, help people feel seen and heard. That should be, prerequisite. And if your heart's not there, then maybe don't have that conversation. So here's the example I mentioned earlier about Mother Teresa and making sure you're in the right place before engaging.
How do we manage that? Because people fall in love with an idea. A great example I like to use, Mother Teresa. You go to somebody and you're like, well, Mother Teresa was actually not a good person and did a tremendous amount of harm and was an extremely troubled person at the very least. We don't think she was a saint. And people who know nothing about Mother Teresa, except she was a nun born in Calcutta, she's Catholic, that's all they know. They know nothing specific about her except they fell in love with the idea that she was a saintly old woman. They'll just flip out. I mean, they're not interested in discussion. The defense modes kick in and they are saying, they actually attack the messenger. Who would ever say anything untoward about Mother Teresa? So how do we manage that? Because emotion so often, us falling in love with ideas, we're all guilty. How do we get around that?
Well, that is a great example of generating reactants. If you were to approach a person who loves Mother Teresa and you're thinking, I would like them to not love Mother Teresa, the first thing I would ask is, why do you want to do that? Like, what is your motivation? Let's start with let's have a step 0 in any stepwise process. What is it that you're hoping to do here? What is driving your desire to engage in that dynamic? And let's get as honest with yourself as possible about it. Are you trying to reduce some sort of harm? Are you interested in that person having very accurate beliefs? Is this something about you want the world to be all fact-based and you want, or do you have something against religion? What is your personal motivation here? Get very honest with yourself first, and then approach the other person with that same sort of curiosity. What is motivating their desire to hold that position? What is driving that attitude they currently hold? It probably has very little to do with facts about Mother Teresa. Most likely they had an attitude, a value, a social structure that all generated the motivation to look at all the evidence available in the world and cherry pick it for things that paint Mother Teresa in a positive light.
All right. Okay, Jackie.
Yes, I really appreciate this discussion. I'm really learning a lot. So when you ask what your motivations are, for me personally, I can kind of play the game and say, well, you know, this church is all made up and all these stories are myth. And I agree 100% this church does far more harm than good. But when I look at myself, and I'm going to be honest, it's my own deep insecurities are coming out, and I want people to believe me. And I want to be right. And the bottom line is that's a lot of motivation that comes out when I start trying to have a discussion is I want to be right, and I want them to validate that I'm right. And if they leave, that is really big validation that I'm right. And so I really appreciate this discussion because it's really easy to not take a deep, hard look at yourself. And I decided today, thinking a lot, I have a family member that's a magma person, a lot of stuff. And I thought the bottom line is you got to lead with love.
Oh, Kendall, you're muted.
That's why the book goes into like community is the biggest part of change usually. And you know, you deserve, Jackie, that understanding and validation. It's probably not going to come by the people who believe differently. So you've got to find another community that can give you that, because you're not going to get that. Going back to Jenny's recommendation of, you know, adjusting our expectations. You really have to understand that you aren't going to get certain things from certain people. So great insight, and thank you for your vulnerability.
Jeffrey.
Jeff.
Yeah, the one issue that comes up in this, you know, my wife and I went to nephew's missionary farewell last week in Texas, which was quite eye-opening. But there's this power differential problem that I think gets mixed up here in the church and other organizations, where people who are in power either because of wealth or education or organization, they can kind of, in some respects, impose their will almost on the others. And I think that often creates a conflating confounder in all of these discussions. You know, so like I have brothers, they're very active, but you know, they're heterosexual, cisgender, they're in good relationships, their kids are all kind of following the script, and they refuse to accept the empirical data of people who are outside of that, and they naively believe that if you just follow the script from their power position, it will fix everything. And I think that just makes it very difficult to have these conversations.
I 1,000,000,000% empathize with that, but again, just kind of understand that belief is working for them. I mean, if they had a different background and different experiences, if their skin color was different, if they had a different sexuality, I can guarantee you they would probably examine that belief more readily than someone where it's like, well, this seems to be working. What's your problem? You know, like on a surface level, that actually makes sense. We don't like it, but it does make sense. And step one, I think, is understanding that process, even though I agree completely that that's a problem, but that's a them problem. Shauna.
Yeah, kind of off topic, but on topic. Am I the only person? Okay, because of abuse growing up and being in an emotionally abusive marriage, I fine-tuned this ability to understand different people's points of views to an extreme where I would take that on as my own point of view, knowing that I didn't really believe in it, but there was something wrong with me that, the outside person. And that's how I learned to survive, was to really be able, and I used to call it my superpower, that I can really understand other people's points of view. But I took it on as my own, thinking that there was something wrong with me, that I didn't agree with it, but I was going to pretend like I did agree with it, and eventually I would get it. So I was on the other end of this whole concept of changing. I changed my own minds to do that. Am I the only one that does that or did that? I'm working on that. I'm a lot better, but I kind of hang back now and stay. I'm afraid to get engaged in a conversation that I don't agree with somebody, because I'm afraid I will go back into old patterns. And I built a wall to protect myself from that.
Just two quick thoughts on that. I come from a very similar thing. Like I was uncomfortable to have my own opinion for most of my life. I literally have a 3,000-page study journal where I would not allow myself to think or believe something unless I had a general authority quote to back it up. And I think that is, part of our background and priors in programming and people-pleasing tendencies. But another thought that I had is Aristotle said the mark of an enlightened mind is the ability to hold on to a thought without needing to accept or reject it. So if you're able to look at ideas in that way, that probably shows you have a lot of objectivity and advanced thinking abilities going on. Just a thought. Okay, Bruce, and then someone else.
Yeah, I'm kind of relating to what Shauna said. I know, and I never articulated it a whole lot. For years, I never had a self-concept where I was valued and my opinion was valued, but I would see it I had a employee who was this young African American woman, and she knew what she thought and what she was going to do in any situation, and that was it, and that was right. And I'm just going like, man, I have never thought that my opinion was valid unless it came from somebody else. And this is after I had distanced myself from the church, but that whole thing of where my opinion, what I think is right, is valuable enough to guide my life. And I think maybe that is a common experience in the church, where we're wanting external description and validation that we don't personally have because we are unworthy to have that. So that's my thought.
Yeah, I resonate deeply with that.
Yvonne, did you have your hand up? Oh, okay.
Yeah, Steph?
Hey, yeah, so I just kind of wondered how much of this sometimes is a holdover from being in the LDS church, where, like, if we learn something that's truth and we're told to bear our testimony and share it with everyone. And I kind of have felt like this similar feeling now that I'm on the opposite side, that there is this drive and like this need that now I know this other truth, I've got to tell other people and change their minds. And I don't know that that's always healthy. Like, taking that step back of maybe learning to like love people first, or I'm just not sure how that plays into it. But it seems like that's kind of a holdover from being raised in that entitlement that I have to share my truth with everyone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I resonate with that. That's what I thought, being a member is you stand for truth, true to the truth that our parents have cherished, like we sing about it and we have to stand up for it. And one of the things that I like about my life now, being more distanced from the church, is when I get on an airplane, I don't feel this constant pressure to be a missionary. I love it. Go ahead, Jenny. Jenny, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I love that. I love that thought of like now it's flipped, right? I think part of that is like what came to mind for me was when we're in the church, aren't we taught like you it's your job to save everyone and you'll rejoice with them and the celestial kingdom and all the, like you take on kind of this savior mentality. And then when we switch to like believe something else strongly, I don't think the savior mentality necessarily goes away. Like it's part of our fabric, and we continue with that. One other thought too about like feeling like we don't have a voice. I have also struggled with that, and in my studies, I've come across. You know, we have to be multicultural competent. So we studied like Asian culture, and there it's all about, in general, it's all about community over self. And that is how we survive as a population. And I feel like in the Mormon church, that is also a big thing, community over self. And again, if we look at like our pioneer ancestors, that's how they had to survive, is they couldn't put themselves first. So I guess I'm just kind of wondering, you know, in my musing, is that like kind of a holdover? And I don't know if it's necessarily totally unique to Mormonism, because I've seen it in other places.
Yeah, no, the book goes into great detail about how like if you changed your position and you couldn't be relied upon in your in-group, you were ostracized, and ostracized from the in-group meant death. One of the quotes is, you know, we're not built for accuracy. We're built for social conformity. And oh, I forget the first part of the quote, but it's something about if facts don't matter as much as social death matters. Social death matters more, basically. Okay, let's move on and go to the final solutions here. So the book goes over 3 really effective, comparatively effective methods for having conversations. The first is called deep canvassing. This comes out of LA and some political movements. And here's the steps that they found after literally tens of thousands of attempts and conversations and tweaking things and giving things the best chance to go well. And here are the steps. So number 1, establish rapport. Assure the other person you aren't out to shame them. Then ask for consent to explore their reasoning. Ask how strongly they feel about an issue on a scale of 1 to 10. Share a story about someone affected by this issue. That can be yourself, they mentioned. And then after sharing the story, ask a second time how strongly they feel. And if the number moved, ask why. Again, you want to get them talking as much as possible. Once they've settled, ask why does that number feel right to you? Again, you're trying to understand the fence that's up. What do they value? Why did they rate it that way? What's their priors? Once they've offered their reasons, repeat back to them in your own words. Ask if you've done a good job summarizing what they've said. And if not, repeat until they are satisfied. And I love this moment in any conversation when they say, ah, you get it. You know, like now someone is sharing this with me and they see what I see the way that I see it. You don't have to agree or disagree, but you've demonstrated that you see what they see without judgment. Ask if there was a time in their life before they felt that way, and if so, what led to their current attitude. Again, I like the analogy of the fence. Why was that fence constructed? Step 8 is listen, summarize, and repeat. Again, most of this is getting them to talk. It's not about you. Step 9, briefly share a personal story of how you reached your position, but do not argue if they're different. Ask for a rating a final time, then wrap up and wish them well. We'll talk a little bit about that, but this is the one that I'm most familiar with, street epistemology. Step 1 on that is, again, same thing, establish rapport. Ask for a claim. This works best when it's a fact-based claim. It can be, you know, anything, including like a subjective claim of like, I like strawberry ice cream better, or, you know, gun control in this country should be more, or whatever it is, but just something that can be evaluated. And then again, say their claim in your own words, confirm that you have it correctly. This is the most important thing, and the one that gets skipped most often in my experience is clarify definitions. What do you mean exactly by gun control? What do you mean by tastes better or whatever it is? But this number 5 is the secret sauce. If you, again, remember nothing else from this is one of the good things to remember. Ask them their confidence level. On a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you in this position, in this opinion, in this thing that you believe in? And again, just going back to what we said earlier, think of the dramatic gap between you're wrong and you should believe like I do versus I want to understand why you believe what you believe. And my first big question is, how confident are you? That gets them to reflect on their own thinking. You have moved the conversation away from defensiveness, and you've made it not only about them, but provided a safe space where they can self-reflect, which we do not do naturally because we're cognitive misers and thinking requires energy, and we want to, conserve energy as much as possible. But that question just brings all of that to the surface and has a much better chance of things going well. So you talk about why they arrived at that confidence level. And just when you do that, that alone, just in my experience, has ensured that conversations go dramatically better. Not always perfect, not always even good or great, but just all things, everything else being equal, a much more productive conversation. This is probably the hardest one. You've got to have some training about epistemology to do number 7. Ask what method they use to judge the quality of their reasons. So like, there's spiritual truth, there's empiricism, there's rationalism, like all these things that you could go into. Watch some videos. I've linked on the group page an entire course of how you can get trained in doing street epistemology that goes over these things. Step 8 is listen, summarize, repeat, and then part company by suggesting you continue the conversation later. And I like what Anthony says in his things is like, just end with, I encourage you to continue thinking about your thinking. Just leave that extra little, seedling that maybe might grow because, maybe they haven't reflected on why they believe what they believe. And now they're going to think more about it. And again, in my experience, a lot of people are too prideful to admit that, they've really realized how shallow their thinking is or how low quality reasons they are giving. And later, not in your presence, but later, they will change their mind. So before we go over the last thing given, this was the bulk of what the chapter's focused on. Any thoughts as to these methods compared to what might be our natural inclinations to go into these conversations with?
I think you covered it so clearly that we're all just kind of taking it in. So no, this is really good. Really, really excellent.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I had to read this book twice before I really could compartmentalize these things. And I'm going to go back a third time because it is that good. But again, they emphasize that like the people who are really good at deep canvassing and street epistemology, you do have to go through quite a bit of training, like, 100+ hours. But at least we're giving people the steps here. Jeff.
That's right.
Yeah, just one quick point. I follow this regularly with my brothers, and they don't like to talk to me about the church, and they get hung up on why do I keep asking for definitions and stuff like that. What I find fascinating is any other topic, no problem. I mean, it just goes to show that kind of religion lives in this different space. I mean, my one brother, he just says to me, I'm just keeping my head above water. It works for me. I don't want to talk about it, which is fine. I think
yeah, and again, we should be very compassionate to that, because what's the alternative? He has a faith crisis and has to take months off of work to work through it. I mean, who's got time for that?
But one other point that I want to mention, I mean, just curious other people's view here. And maybe I was a little bit different because I was never, even from the time I was a teenager, I was never really into the history and the doctrine. In fact, I used to have this, my dad would say, it's okay to be orthoprax, you don't need to be orthodox. And I just felt like it worked for a while and then it just stopped working. But there's this I never I never wanted to do missionary work really, because I just didn't think it was valuable. You know, it might have been valuable for me given my family, and a lot of people, I just felt like it was always they didn't want to go out and proselyte. You know, they felt like this obligation. Whereas, like, if you read a good book like this book, or you see a good movie, I never have a problem telling people about it. It's not like I try to want to convince them to believe it. And so I always felt like there was an asymmetry there, which I tell my brothers this even today. I would say, look, if this is so great, you should be talking about this to everybody. But when you start getting down to the details, it just sounds nonsensical. Anyway, I mean, it's just, I find there's an asymmetry there. I mean, some people are really all in and they're fine going around talking about gold plates and angels and, you know,
Yeah, in Steven Pinker's book, he has a chapter about in his book Rationality. He says that people compartmentalize things, and religion is placed in a special compartment where critical thinking, it's immune from that. So I forget his rationale there, but it's definitely worth reading up on that part of that book. It was fascinating. Bruce.
Yeah, I just had one final thought. I think it depends a lot, you know, the environment people live in. I just visited Utah, and when your community, your family, often your job, your retirement depends on your engagement as being seen as a active believing Mormon, is so different from mine. I live in Pasadena, California. I just in my town, I just drove by a Mormon church that I had never seen before, and I have lived here for decades. I just went up a street that I had no idea it was there because I've been so disengaged. And with my work, I worked for a large international insurance company. I ran across 2 Mormons ever. You know, the Mormon culture has very, very little to do in my life. And you know, people who live in the Morador, it's a different thing to leave. So, and we are running long.
Okay, yeah, we can end anytime. The last slide is this one right here, and it's basically what we've all gone over, just fewer steps. You're asking about confidence, and if it's, you know, not a 10, why not? And repeat the reasons back. It's just a shorter version of what we've already gone over, and we're done.
Yeah. Wow. This has been absolutely amazing. Yay. Oh, here we go. That's it. What a great job, Kendall. This has just been, I think, you know, people have been commenting, but I think also people have just been thinking and taking it in. Yeah. Clap, 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 Jackie. Yeah, this has just been wonderful. Just to be able to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else like that. And that helps repair, restore, rebuild relationships, which is amazing. So thank you. Thank you so much, Kendall.
Yeah, let me end with one final quote. This is page 17. Persuasion is not coercion. It's not an attempt to defeat your intellectual opponent with facts or moral superiority, nor is it a debate with a winner or loser. Persuasion is leading a person along in stages, helping them better understand their own thinking and how it could align with any given message. You can't persuade another person to change their mind if that person does not want to. And as you will see, this is the first part of the book, the techniques that work best focus on a person's motivation more than facts and conclusions.
Yeah, that's true. It makes you think about your own thinking, you know? It's a good exercise. All right, let's do very quickly our final slides so we can get to Yvonne's little preview.
Kendall, stop sharing real quick.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
If you stop sharing, then we'll do that. Again, just such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Perfect. Okay. Oh, goodness, I look so big to myself. All right, I don't see any slides. Here we go. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we just finished that, and we will now move on to a very quick little preview from the discussion leader, Yvonne, of our next book, Sam Harris, The Moral Landscape.
You're muted, Yvonne.
There we go. Sorry, guys. More landscape. Oh, it's up there. So yes, you all know Sam Harris. He's an atheist. I I read this book in 2015, and I'm rereading it again. What he's gonna the core of it though is, and he says it at the beginning, is that we can't help our worldview, but people from religion generally believe that moral truth exists only because God has woven it, God, he or she has woven it into the very fabric of our being. And then there's the other side that our notions of good and evil are evolutionary, and that like we've studied so much about how the brain processes itself and believes things that he calls that the evolutionary pressure and cultural invention of good and evil. But the goal of this book, says Sam, is to begin a conversation about how moral truth can be understood in the context of science. So that's what he's going to do. He's going to try to persuade us that there's a scientific way to tell what's good and what's bad and what's moral. The end.
You're muted.
Oh my gosh. Boy, we're not doing this very well today, are we? I was just going to say that we love Sam Harris and we really look forward to Yvonne. It's going to be great. So, okay, let's speed through the rest of our slides. You can always access, if you've missed any of our book club meetings, you can find them on YouTube by searching the Good Book Club for Post-Mormons, and wherever any audio podcasts you can find that you like to go to, you can find the Good Book Club there. We have quite a number of wonderful episodes, just like this one that Kendall presented to us, all kinds of books. So check that out. Other things that are quickly on the radar, we have a Good Media Facebook page where we kind of curate things that are in the media, not just books, but series and movies and things like that. We just throw information up there. So that's kind of fun. We also have Mormonish podcast that Landon and I co-host, and we often talk to a lot of you guys. We talk about the books that we do here. So that's really fun. Like I said, Alyssa Grunfall, we just did her a couple weeks ago. You can check that out on YouTube. If you'd like to participate more or become a member of the Good Book Club and you just are checking it out today, you can send me an email to thegoodbookclub@mail.com and I'll send you links that way if you're not so much on other social media. Otherwise, find us on Facebook. That is our primary place where we put links and information, new books, things like that, and kind of interact throughout the month. And that's our logo, the row of books right there. So find us and jump on there. If you do send me an email to thegoodbookclub@mail.com, sometimes my reply goes to spam. So make sure you check your spam folder if you have sent me an email, because I'll always respond. And we'll say goodbye for now. Thank you.